Hey everybody, welcome back to the Planet Coaster Ski Resort. I know it's been a while since the last video in this series, but I have to say, it's January, I'm gonna be skiing in a few weeks, so I really got into the skiing mood, and also I'm a little bit bummed out of Planet Zoo recently, so what better to do than to return to the ski resorts in Planet Coaster and make sure that that thing's not just hanging out there. So that's what we're doing today, and specifically I'm gonna be working on a fun park, or snow park, or terrain park, whatever you want to call it. I think there are some national differences in here, doesn't matter too much. Whatever the case, a fun park is basically the ski resort's equivalent of a skate park. For those who don't know too much about this kind of thing, it's an area with features such as jumps and rails and boxes that people can do tricks on. And I have to say straight away before I get into this that I'm not really a great authority on this topic, because honestly I've always been too much of a pussy to actually do tricks on these, so all I've really done is maybe some tiny jumps, and I've put my skis on some boxes and failed miserably, so I'm not even gonna try to pretend like I'm an expert here. But at the end of the day, they are a very common occurrence in ski resorts, especially nowadays. In Europe, they've only started really catching on in the last few years, but it's something that a good ski resort should always have, probably. And they're just fun to build as well, so of course I wanted to build one in Planet Coaster as well. Now, starting off with the elements, I'm going to try to list these, so pay attention to what I'm talking about here, and maybe we can figure some stuff out. So the first element that I just built was a simple jump, honestly, not too much to it, with a step down ramp specifically, because that's the thing which I think works best with the in-game terraforming tool. A more common and easy type of ramp for jumps is a simple tabletop where you go up and then you have a flat section and then you go down. But I think with the terrain tool and Planet Coaster, it's a bit harder to make that look realistic, so I ended up going for a step down ramp instead. And right here I'm working on a rainbow box, which is a simple box type structure with a rainbow shape. You could also call them a curved box or whatever. And these are honestly some of the easier sort of elements, and one of the few that I've ever put my skis on top of. Something interesting is also that apparently these things are made out of polyethylene, and it's just this sort of plastic material that's made in such a way that it's quite hard and you can sort of jib on it, as the pros would call it, but it doesn't hurt your skis or snowboard, and they have some rounded edges as well. So even though everything looks quite edgy in Planet Coaster here, in reality they would have just the right material to like not damage your skis or your snowboard in any way. So here we have the rainbow box, and I just put down a flat down box where you start off with the flat section and then have this kink, and afterwards you go down. So it's a very similar sort of thing, just you're following a different trajectory pretty much. And another common occurrence beside these so-called fun boxes is a rail, which, as the name implies, it's just a rail, some round tube of different sizes and shape. They don't even have to be round, sometimes you have some square rails. We'll get back into that later in the video. But yeah, I decided to add one of those as well. A simple one which goes from flat to down to flat as well. And at this point I decided to add a slightly more intricate kind of rail, which is a bit strange, I have to be honest. This is one that I didn't get from the booklets. For most of this video I was trying to find online sources, pictures, and all kinds of documents to see, what the exact features of a fun park commonly are, what their names are, and what they're made out of. And for this one, I just sort of deviated from what I saw. Usually, if you have a rail and it goes from flat down to flat, you just have two kinks, one to go down and one to go flat again. And in this one, I figured I kind of want to follow the shape of the hill a bit more and just add two kinks on top of it. I don't know if I'm destroying, if I'm sort of calling upon blasphemy of the fun park community here, but it's something that I thought would look cool, so decided to go for this slightly less standard shape here. But it all works out. It's a slightly different rail type as well, because it's a much thinner rail type with these plastic boards between it. So a little bit of variety in terms of what the elements look like and what their colors and materials are exactly as well. And finally, to finish this section of the fun park, I decided to add another ramp. One mistake that I've sort of made throughout this fun park, which is kind of an unfortunate consequence of the fact that this whole ski resort is really quite small and I have to make everything very crammed, is that many of the features are very close together compared to an actual fun park. And the ramp on the top section isn't, well, it's too high up the hill to like actually make a very good jump off of it, I'm afraid. So I decided to add a jump at the end of this whole fun park section as well, so that if you really want to make a big jump, you can gather some speed and finish off the fun park section here. So again, I'm trying to use the paths to my advantage here because it's very difficult to shape out mounds with the terraforming tool in such a way that you have straight edges on the side. Because at the end of the day, these fun parks get made every year just by shoving a bunch of snow together into certain shapes and putting the elements in it. It's something that doesn't stay in summer, it's always a temporary thing, so you have to make it look like this sort of constructed winter fun park, as opposed to the very sort of permanent setting of a skate park in a city. And yeah, that is basically it for this section of the park. I decided to just finish it with a couple of poles beside the jumps, because that's something that I saw some jumps in real life had as well. It's something that I haven't seen in the ski resorts that I've been to, but I figured, might as well add it. So at this point I took a bit of a sidestep and decided to go back to this little slope next to the chairlift and thought I might as well add a bit more challenge for some of the more professional skiers or people who are just really good at it or who love challenging themselves, and built a mogul slope, also known as bumps, or also known in Germany as a Buckelpiste, which I find strange because the word mogul in English apparently comes from the Bavarian and Austrian word mogul. So the fact that the English word is based on a German word, yet the German word for this kind of slope is different, is a bit puzzling. Not sure what the linguistics of that are, but anyway, it's a slope with a bunch of bumps, and as a skier it just adds an extra challenge because you have to be able to like make your curves between or on top of these jumps depending on that was a pretty bad voice crack, depending on, you know, what works out for you. And especially as an Olympic sport, it's really hardcore because it really takes a toll on your knees. It's quite heavy to do this kind of thing, especially when the slope is very steep. So it's always a fun challenge and something that you see very often in ski resorts just for the more expert skiers. So it's something that I wanted to add in this resort as well. Now at this point, I decided that I've done enough stuff for the more expert skiers and snowboarders out there, and I should add something to cater to the beginners as well. So something that I've wanted to do for a while, but still haven't because it seemed like a very daunting task, is create a beginner slope with a simple, short surface lift. And the reason that I was so afraid of doing this is, well, this surface lift that I'm building right here is made out of pieces made by Cebism on the Steam Workshop, and again, huge thanks go out to them because this whole series wouldn't have been possible without all of the amazing theme park toolkit items that they uploaded. The chairlift additions that I added to the in-game chairlifts and gondolas come from them as well as a bunch of other ski theme makers toolkit items like skis and helmets and all kinds of things. So really, without their help, this whole series wouldn't have happened. And they also made this whole set to create a surface lift, including animated wheels, so this thing can actually function. At least it doesn't really function, but it looks like it could. So that's super cool. And in real life, surface lifts like this are very common on beginner slopes because they're very cheap, they're very easy to construct, and they're also quite old. And I think the particular type of surface lift that this one resembles, which is the Poma lift, in real life made by the manufacturer Poma, which has since fused into Leitner Poma, which is one of the biggest cableway manufacturers in the world. Sorry, going very off topic here. Anyway, the Poma lift is what this thing is usually called in real life, and because it's so cheap and easy to build, it's something that you find on a lot of beginner slopes. Kind of conversely though, it is something that beginners often struggle with because unlike a chairlift or a gondola, you stay with your feet on the ground in this kind of lift. So what happens in this lift, and it's something that I can't really visualize in Planet Coaster here, is that these cables will have a bunch of sticks with buttons at the end of them attached to them. And in the station, you grab one of these sticks with a button on it. It just passes by as the cable is moving, and you put the button underneath your butt, and then it just drags you up the hill. So that's basically how it works. So you're still standing, you're sort of leaning onto the button, but you're just holding onto it, and it drags you up the hill as the cable makes it go up. So it's not really the most comfortable thing. So it's sometimes quite a struggle for beginners or kids to get used to them. I think as a kid I've fallen out of a lot of sort of rope tow lifts like this, although for me personally the T-bar lift is way worse. That's a sort of like two-person version of the same concept. It's, I think, the nightmare of a lot of beginning skiers and something that a lot of people end up falling out of. Anyway, they're often really short, and that's why they're used on beginner slopes as well. So you know, you sometimes you only need a 100-meter stretch of slope to be serviced by a ski lift, and it wouldn't really make sense to build an entire gondola or chairlift for that. Then this lift works out as well. So that's something that I'll return to later, but I'm building it in the location of a beginner slope, and I'm gonna be coming back to that later as I actually flesh it out. But I thought realistically I've been doing so much for the expert skiers in this resort, I really should build something very simple that beginners can go to as well. So basically that's the idea behind that lift. And once again, thanks to Cebism for creating that amazing Theme Maker's Toolkit set, because without it I really couldn't have built it. Now moving back to the fun park, at this part I decided to add some fences, partly because I wanted to separate the irregular slope, if you will, from the fun park section, and partly because there are some jumps close to the forest here, and especially the one at the end is close to a curve where the forest sort of looms in front of the fun park section of this slope. So I'm gonna add some fences along that as well, just to make sure that people don't jump straight into the trees, because that would kind of suck. So bit of a safety feature as well. By the way, you might have noticed up until this point that the first part of this time-lapse was a bit slower than usual. This is partly due to the fact that Planet Coaster was just very slow and I constantly had to wait very long to place pieces, but also I just had to slow it down because things were going a bit quicker than I could explain them at first in the time-lapse. So yeah, it's not quite the 12 times that I usually speed up my videos. Maybe more like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, something like that. Not sure. Anyway, maybe it makes a visual difference, maybe it doesn't. Just something that I noted. Anyway, moving on to the second part of the fun park. This is a section that I wasn't really sure if I was going to build it when I started building this, but at the end of the day, when I had finished the first half, I figured it wasn't really enough. It wasn't really feeling like a full-fledged fun park, and it just needed a few more elements to finish it. Not to mention that I have a very, very wide section of slope here with the perfect degree of slope, I guess, to make a fun park out of it. So something I wanted to try here as well. Now this part is interesting because I'm building yet another rail, but this one is a square box rail. And what you can also see is that the sort of shape of a rail. So you'll have the rail itself and then two sections on the sides where your skis or snowboard actually make contact with the rail, which I made out of cable pieces in this case. And this one also kind of jumps off of this ramp that it has, so you can also do some tricks off of that. And then here is a simple ride-on well, I'm not exactly sure what to call it actually. It's like a flat box. I would call it a ride-on, as most of these features are, because there is a difference between what some people call a gap-on feature or a ride-on feature, where a ride-on just connects to the ground in front of it and you just pretty much slide onto the feature, and a gap-on is where you really have to jump up to it. And the only sort of gap-on that I can come up with is the first rail that I made, with the very thick rail that sort of juts out of the snow just behind the ramp, which is a bit more difficult, of course, to get on than just a simple slide-on. But then again, it's also something that you can probably do some tricks with as well. And finally, well, actually not finally, I forgot one feature there. The second to last thing that I built there was another rainbow box, but one that sort of flattens out toward the end, which is something that I also haven't seen in real life, but it just seems like a pretty cool addition to make it a bit more different. And then the actual final feature here is another step down ramp, very similar to the other ones already, just a little bit bigger, this one, so I think you can probably do the biggest jumps off of this ramp here. And this is also the final section of the fun park, and at this point the slope just returns to the section where all the other slopes come together, and to this wide section where you have the gondola to the side. Actually, fun fact, at first I was always planning to have the fun park right next to the gondola there, but then I realized that this would probably create a bit of a funnel effect, because we do have 3 different slopes coming together at that point. So realistically, if this resort was going to be quite busy, I wouldn't want the fun park to be in this sort of narrow stretch of land where a bunch of different slopes come together, so I ended up opting for this one because there's a lot more space here to work with, and yeah, I think it just makes more sense in that perspective. I also decided to add some useless space on the side here, which is not an actual slope but just an empty area, which clearly demarcates that the snow looks very different there than it does on the actual slopes, which is something that's very difficult to pull off in Planet Coaster. In real life it's something that you quickly notice, because the snow on the non-slope sections is always a bit higher and it's ungroomed, so it looks a bit messy, but in Planet Coaster it can be quite difficult to make that difference in texture very apparent. But yeah, that's just a small touch to finish off this section of the park. And with that said, that's the end of this episode, so I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll leave you with some cinematic footage, and I'll be back very soon with another episode of this series, so stay tuned. Bye guys!